There comes a moment when a person can no longer explain why everything feels heavy. You wake, perform your duties, speak to others, and continue moving. Yet somewhere within you, something has gone strangely quiet. You may call it laziness, weakness, or exhaustion. But perhaps the deeper truth is different. Perhaps your soul is resisting a life that no longer belongs to you. And before you try to silence that feeling, listen to what it may be trying to reveal. Perhaps you have reached a point where even the things that once gave you pleasure feel strangely distant. Messages become exhausting. Conversations feel like obligations. The smallest responsibilities seem heavier than they should. And sometimes you find yourself staring at the ceiling, wondering why you cannot simply feel normal again. What makes this more painful is that you may have no obvious reason to feel this way. Your life may appear perfectly acceptable from the outside, yet internally, you feel as though you are slowly disappearing from it. This is where we must make an important distinction. Physical tiredness and psychological exhaustion are not always the same thing. The body can become tired from work, lack of sleep, or stress. But the mind can become exhausted from something much more subtle. Living for too long in contradiction with yourself. You may say yes when everything inside you wants to say no. You may smile because others expect you to be fine. You may continue pursuing a goal simply because you once decided it was what a successful person should want. You may carry responsibilities that nobody forced upon you, but that you became afraid to put down. And slowly, the distance between who you truly are and who you believe you must be begins to consume you. Carl Jung understood this conflict deeply. He wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Not because self-acceptance is destructive, but because genuine self-acceptance requires us to stop hiding from truths that may force us to change." Perhaps you are not exhausted because you are incapable of handling life. Perhaps you have simply been handling too much while remaining disconnected from what you actually feel. The question then is no longer, how can I force myself to keep going? It becomes much more important. What has my exhaustion been trying to tell me? Because sometimes the mind does not collapse because it is weak. Sometimes it becomes exhausted because it has been carrying a truth that you have refused to hear. There is a kind of exhaustion that does not come from having too much to do, but from having to be someone you are not. You can spend years becoming exactly what others reward: dependable, successful, agreeable, strong, patient, responsible. And because everyone praises this version of you, you may never notice what it costs. You learn to hide disappointment because you do not want to be difficult. You swallow anger because you want to be a good person. You abandon your own desires because someone else's expectations seem more important. Eventually, the life you built may look perfectly respectable, while feeling strangely empty from the inside. Jung believed that the unconscious contains truths that the conscious personality often refuses to acknowledge. His famous observation captures this beautifully. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Think about what that means for your exhaustion. Perhaps your conscious mind keeps saying, "Keep going, you should be grateful, You cannot stop now. Everyone is counting on you. Yet somewhere deeper, another part of you may be saying, I cannot live like this anymore. The conflict between these two voices can become incredibly draining. You are not only doing things, you are constantly suppressing the reactions those things create inside you. You are working while wishing to escape. You are smiling while feeling resentment. You are achieving while wondering why the achievement brings no satisfaction. And the more successfully you suppress these contradictions, the more energy your psyche must spend maintaining the illusion that everything is fine. This is why simply forcing yourself to become more productive may not solve the problem. Productivity can help when you are disorganized, but it cannot heal a life that feels fundamentally disconnected from you. At some point, you have to stop asking, how can I become better at tolerating this? And begin asking, why am I tolerating this at all? That question can be uncomfortable because it threatens the identity you have spent years constructing. But it also opens a door, because perhaps the exhaustion is not asking you to become stronger. Perhaps it is asking you to become more honest. And to understand why that honesty can feel so frightening, we need to look at the identity you have created for the world, the mask Jung called the persona. Every human being learns sooner or later how to become acceptable to the world. You discover which version of yourself receives approval, which emotions make people uncomfortable, which behaviors earn affection, and which parts of you are better left unseen. Jung called the social identity we construct the persona. It allows us to function in society, to work, communicate, cooperate, and fulfill our responsibilities. There is nothing inherently wrong with having one. The danger begins when you forget that it is a mask and start believing that the mask is your entire identity. You become the strong one, so you believe you are never allowed to break. You become the helpful one, so you feel guilty whenever you need help. You become the successful one, so failure begins to feel like a threat to your existence. You become the peaceful one, so you bury your anger until you no longer know what you are angry about. You become the person everyone can depend on, and eventually nobody thinks to ask whether you have anything left to give. This is where psychological exhaustion can become so confusing. The world may reward you for the very behavior that is slowly draining you. People may tell you, you are so strong, while you secretly wish someone would give you permission to stop being strong for a moment. You may hear, you always have everything under control, while internally you are desperately searching for somewhere to put everything you have been carrying. Jung warned against becoming completely identified with the persona because the personality presented to the world is only one part of the whole psyche. There is a deeper self underneath it, containing feelings, desires, fears, contradictions, and possibilities that may never fit neatly into the role you have been playing. And when those neglected parts remain unheard for too long, they do not simply disappear. They begin looking for another way to speak. Sometimes through anxiety, sometimes through emptiness, sometimes through anger, sometimes through the strange feeling that you no longer recognize the life you are living. So ask yourself quietly, who would you be if you did not have to impress anyone, rescue anyone, please anyone, or prove anything? Do not rush to answer. because the person who appears in that silence may be closer to your authentic self than the identity you have spent years performing. And this is where exhaustion begins to reveal something unexpected. Perhaps it is not merely taking something from you. Perhaps it is warning you that the life built around your persona has reached its limit.
What if the exhaustion you have been fighting is not simply an obstacle standing between you and the life you want, but a message from a part of yourself that you have ignored for too long? We are often taught to treat uncomfortable emotions as problems to eliminate. If we feel sadness, we distract ourselves. If we feel anxiety, we try to control it. If we lose motivation, we criticize ourselves. If we become exhausted, we force ourselves to continue. But depth psychology asks a different question. What if the symptom contains information? This does not mean that every form of exhaustion has a hidden psychological meaning. Physical illness, sleep deprivation, depression, burnout, and many other conditions can produce profound fatigue and produce proper attention. But psychologically, there are moments when your inner resistance is telling you something important. Perhaps you are exhausted because you have been saying yes to a life that your deeper self has been saying no to for years. Perhaps you are tired because every day requires you to suppress some part of yourself. Jung believed that the psyche possesses a movement toward wholeness, and what we reject does not simply vanish, it remains within us, waiting to be acknowledged. This is why the question, "What is wrong with me?" can sometimes be replaced with a more compassionate question. What has been happening inside me? The first question turns your pain into a personal defect. The second turns it into something you can explore. Imagine carrying a heavy suitcase for years without ever opening it. Eventually, your arms hurt, your shoulders ache, and you begin wondering why you are so weak. But the problem may not be the weakness of your arms. The problem may be that you have never stopped to ask what you are carrying. Perhaps there is grief inside that suitcase. Perhaps there is anger. Perhaps there are dreams you abandoned because they seemed unrealistic. Perhaps there are boundaries you were too afraid to establish. Perhaps there is simply a tired human being who has spent years believing that needing rest means failing. Your psyche may not be asking you to destroy your life or abandon every responsibility. It may simply be asking you to listen before you continue. Because sometimes the moment you stop fighting the feeling and begin understanding it, exhaustion changes from an enemy into a guide. And when you finally listen closely, you may discover that beneath the tiredness is something you have spent years trying not to see. The shadow of the life you are actually living. There are parts of yourself you may have learned to reject long before you became consciously aware of them. Perhaps you were taught that anger makes you a bad person, that wanting more makes you selfish, that saying no makes you difficult, or that vulnerability makes you weak. So you adapted. You pushed certain feelings into the background and built a personality that could survive without them. Jung called this hidden territory the shadow. But the shadow is not simply the dark or evil part of you.
It contains everything you have refused to recognize as belonging to you, including qualities that may actually be necessary for becoming whole. Your anger may contain a boundary you never established. Your sadness may contain a loss you never allowed yourself to mourn. Your jealousy may reveal a desire you were too afraid to admit. Your resentment may reveal how often you have betrayed your own needs to keep other people comfortable. Even your exhaustion may contain a message from a part of yourself that is tired of being ignored. This is why Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." He was pointing towards something uncomfortable, but deeply liberating. Psychological growth does not come from pretending that only the beautiful parts of you deserve to exist. It comes from becoming conscious of the entire inner landscape. So perhaps you should stop asking yourself, "How do I get rid of this feeling?" and instead ask, "What does this feeling know that I do not?" What if your irritation is telling you that a boundary has been crossed? What if your lack of motivation is telling you that the goal you are chasing no longer belongs to you? What if your loneliness is revealing that you have surrounded yourself with people while remaining emotionally unknown? What if the part of you that wants to disappear is not necessarily asking you to disappear from life, but asking you to disappear from a role that has become unbearable? Sit with those questions without judging the answers. You do not have to obey every impulse, but you do need to understand where it comes from. The goal is not to let the shadow control you. It is to stop allowing the unconscious to control you without your awareness. And perhaps this is the beginning of something very important. Realizing that the person you have been trying so desperately to become may not be the person you actually need to be. Beneath the performance, beneath the expectations, beneath the endless effort to be enough, there may still be a quieter self waiting to be heard. The question now is not how to return to the person you were before the exhaustion. It is whether you are finally ready to discover who you can become when you stop abandoning yourself. Perhaps what you need now is not another command to push harder, wake earlier, become more disciplined, or turn your pain into productivity. Perhaps you need permission to stop treating yourself as a problem that must constantly be fixed. If your exhaustion has been trying to tell you something, the first step is not to silence it, but to listen, without immediately judging what you hear. Ask yourself, what in my life consistently leaves me feeling smaller? Notice the people, environments, obligations, and expectations that make you feel as though you must abandon yourself to remain accepted. Then ask a more difficult question. Where am I repeatedly saying yes when something inside me is saying no? You may discover that exhaustion is sometimes created by a life filled with choices that were never truly yours. This does not mean you should impulsively destroy everything and start again. Psychological growth is rarely dramatic. It often begins with very small acts of honesty. Perhaps you finally admit that you are angry.
Perhaps you acknowledge that you miss someone. Perhaps you stop pretending that a particular ambition still matters to you. Perhaps you allow yourself one evening without performing, achieving, or explaining anything. These small moments can become acts of psychological integration. Jung's idea of individuation was not about becoming perfect. It was about becoming more completely yourself by bringing the divided parts of the personality into greater awareness. This means learning to recognize the difference between what you genuinely desire and what you have been conditioned to desire. It means understanding that boundaries are not cruelty, solitude is not failure, and changing direction is not necessarily weakness. It also means recovering parts of yourself that disappeared beneath responsibility. What did you love before you became obsessed with being useful? What made you curious before you started measuring everything by its value? What could you do simply because it made you feel alive, without needing anyone to applaud you? These questions matter because healing is not always about adding something new to your life. Sometimes it is about removing what has buried you beneath it. And perhaps the most important question is this: if nobody expected anything from you, what would you finally allow yourself to become? Do not demand an immediate answer. Let the question live inside you, because the purpose is not to construct a new persona overnight. It is to gradually become honest enough that the life you build begins to resemble the person actually living it. When that happens, rest becomes more than recovery from exhaustion. It becomes the beginning of a return to yourself, to your desires, to your boundaries, and to the quiet inner voice you may have ignored for far too long. There is a point in psychological healing when you stop asking, "How do I become the person I used to be?" and begin asking, "Who am I becoming now?" That distinction changes everything. Because perhaps the goal was never to return to the version of you that could tolerate everything, remain available to everyone, and continue moving without asking what it was costing you. Perhaps that version of you was surviving, not truly living. Jung's concept of individuation offers another possibility: the gradual movement toward becoming more fully yourself. Not a perfect self, not a permanently happy self, not someone who never feels fear, sadness, anger, or exhaustion. A whole person. Someone capable of acknowledging contradiction without being destroyed by it. Someone who can say, "This matters to me," without needing permission. Someone who can say, "This is hurting me," without feeling ashamed. Someone who can walk away from what no longer belongs to them, without believing that leaving means failure. The return to yourself may begin quietly. You may notice that you no longer want to participate in conversations that leave you empty. You may discover that certain ambitions no longer excite you. You may begin craving solitude, not because you hate people, but because you need to hear your own thoughts again. You may suddenly remember an old dream, a forgotten interest, or a part of your personality that disappeared beneath years of responsibility. These moments can feel strange because growth often begins with unfamiliarity. You are meeting yourself without the old masks, And this is why you should not rush to fill every quiet moment with noise. Sometimes you need enough silence to hear what has been buried beneath your constant activity. Sit alone for a while. Write down what you are feeling without trying to make it sound reasonable. Ask yourself what you would change if you were not afraid of disappointing anyone. Ask what you would protect if you finally believed your own needs mattered. Then listen, not for a dramatic revelation, but for the small truths that have been waiting patiently underneath everything. You may discover that you were never truly tired of life itself. You were tired of carrying a version of life that demanded too much of you and gave too little of yourself back. And perhaps the deepest form of healing is not becoming more capable of carrying that weight. Perhaps it is learning which weight was never yours to carry in the first place. When you begin putting it down, slowly and consciously, something inside you may become quiet again. Not because every problem has disappeared, but because for the first time in a long time, you are no longer completely at war with yourself. Perhaps you are not tired of everything. Perhaps you are tired of living so far away from yourself that even ordinary life has begun to feel heavy. You do not need to solve your entire life tonight. You do not need to become stronger, happier, or more productive tomorrow. For now, simply listen. Listen to the exhaustion. Listen to the sadness. Listen to the part of you that has been quietly asking for your attention. You are not required to have all the answers before you take the next step. Sometimes healing begins with one honest sentence. This is what I truly feel. And from that honesty, slowly, the path back to yourself begins to appear.